In chapter 22 of Wuthering Heights, Mrs. Dean and Catherine take a walk on the moors one day in October as heavy rain clouds roll in. They discuss the possibility of Edgar dying, and Mrs. Dean advises Catherine to avoid giving him anxiety on any subject. You might kill him if you were wild and reckless. And cherished a fanciful affection for the son of a person, glad to have him in his grave, referring here to Heathcliff and Linton. Catherine promises to never say a word or act out in any way that would vex her father. Catherine climbs up onto a wall to gather petals from a rose tree. Catherine's hat falls off, and she has to climb the wall to get it, but she gets stuck on the other side because the ground is lower and rose trees and blackberry bushes cover the wall. Mrs. Dean tries all of her keys to the door in the wall, but none work. Just then, Mrs. Dean hears a horse and rider approach. It's Heathcliff. Mrs. Dean hears Catherine tell him her father and Mrs. Dean say he's wicked, and she can't talk to him. Heathcliff denies hating Catherine, then swears Linton is dying because Catherine stopped writing to him. Mrs. Dean accuses Heathcliff of lying, and then she tries to break through the lock to get Catherine. Heathcliff urges Catherine to be generous and contrive to see him. Heathcliff leaves, and it begins to rain. Mrs. Dean can tell the news wounded Catherine's heart. Believing Heathcliff is telling the truth, Catherine convinces Mrs. Dean to travel to Wuthering Heights the next day. Powerful imagery shows readers that Catherine is earthy and unselfish, able to empathize and think ahead, whereas her mother Cathy was impatient and fiery, allowing momentary circumstances to make her gravely ill. Catherine is also a good listener and takes advice from Mrs. Dean. Cathy was sassy with Mrs. Dean. Catherine and Cathy are not exact opposites. Catherine's love of nature and animals reflects Cathy's character, and Catherine, like her mother, is spirited and emotional by nature, acting out of natural affection rather than her father's artificial mannerliness. Nature imagery used metaphorically sprouts up throughout this chapter. Sticking thorns represent Cathy's moral dilemma. Catherine is stuck, and Heathcliff uses guilt to make her feel more stuck and to separate her from Mrs. Dean, represented by the physical wall between them. In this chapter, the meeting with Heathcliff causes Mrs. Dean to say Catherine's heart was clouded in double darkness. A downpour of rain signals the turn in the plot towards stormier times ahead.